This summer, we're inviting you for a very special double feature book study, diving into Small Groups, Big Results by Dr. Julia Lindsay and Rock Your Literacy Block by Lindsay Kemeny. Over 8 weeks, we'll dive into practical research-aligned strategies to help you build a more intentional literacy block, strengthen your small groups, maximize instructional time, and head into back-to-school season with a little more pep in your step. You'll get live weekly discussions, recordings, planning supports, and a community of passionate educators learning alongside of you. If you're ready for practical implementation and not just theory, come join us this summer. It's the summer of the Lindsays. Head to the link in the show notes to save your spot. You're listening to episode 101 of Literacy in Color. When we hear the phrase science of reading, it's easy to assume that every instructional decision has a clear-cut answer. But the deeper you dive into the research, the more you realize that implementation can be filled with nuance and thoughtful professional judgment. In today's episode, I'm joined by my good friend Anna Geiger of Reach All Readers. Together, we're tackling some of the hottest topics in literacy right now, from heart words and phonemic awareness to decodable texts, sound walls, and even what's potentially the best approach to teaching phonics explicitly. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed by conflicting opinions online or wondered how to make sense of competing viewpoints, this conversation is for you. Anna brings an objective yet research-informed perspective that reminds us why teaching literacy will always be both a science and an art. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. I am over the moon to be joined by my good friend Anna Geiger from Reach All Readers, formerly known as the Measured Mom website. And I am very excited to be tapping into this conversation in particular because when we hear the term the science of reading, our minds immediately go to, okay, these are the facts of how the brain learns how to read. And yet, we hear often opposing views, sometimes even conflicting views. And what I love about Anna is that she is very objective in looking at differing sides, and she offers a really level-headed perspective of how to approach some of the nuance in these conversations. And I'm sure that's what even makes her such a wonderful mother. So that's what we're going to be tapping into today. And before we get started, maybe you could just take a moment to briefly introduce yourself and share about what you do.
Well, thank you, Michelle. It's a wonderful chance to talk to you here on the podcast. We've talked many times in real life and in person. It's great to join you on the podcast as well. I was the creator of The Measured Mom back in 2013, so a long time ago when I had 4 little kids. Now we have 6, and our oldest, who was in kindergarten when I started, is now in her first year of college. So lots has happened. A lot has happened. Yeah, crazy. Crazy. Now 4 of the kids are taller than me, and another one is very close to being that way. Life marches on, and a lot's happened in my understanding of how reading works in all those years too. So I was a balanced literacy teacher, and then I began staying home with my kids. And then about 4 or 5 years into that, I began my website, mainly as a way to share the things I was doing with my kids. And quickly it became a place where I shared teaching resources. And I shared lots of resources for teaching according to the balanced literacy way. I had over 160 free sight word books, which were leveled predictable pattern books for parents and teachers, because I thought that was appropriate for teaching reading. And around 2019-ish, I read one of Emily Hanford's articles because one of my readers sent it to me and said, "What do you think about this?" And it was her article about how 3Qing is not backed by research and is actually harmful. And that was hard for me to digest. It took me a while to be even really willing to think about that because I assumed she didn't really know what she was talking about. But once I began diving into it and realizing that much of what I had believed was not true, that was the beginning of a journey for me to learn more about the science of reading. And now that's what I'm really passionate about, helping teachers understand what the research says and then translating that into practical classroom activity.
And you're working on your PhD at the moment as well, right?
Yes. And a big reason for that is for the things we're going to be talking about today, which is being able to understand the nuance because there are so many experts who disagree and it's hard to know what exactly does the research say when people who are reading the same papers have different opinions. And so I'd like to be better at doing that for the teachers that follow me.
Kudos to you. That's on my bucket list one day, maybe when my children are older.
Well, then you'll be right in line with me because I'm not going to be young when it finishes, but it's never too late, right?
Yeah, definitely. And so, as you were on your whole science of reading journey, what felt really noisy or confusing in the beginning as you were learning more about what the research has to say? And when did things maybe start to feel more clear, if ever?
Yeah. Well, for me, first of all, just learning that some things that I had done were harmful for some kids was the difficult thing. But once I became aware of the alternative, understanding what orthographic mapping is and how we can really teach kids to be fluent and proficient readers and writers, that became very exciting. And so I just ate up everything I could find, watched the webinars, paid for trainings, read the books, listened to podcasts. Then the more you get into it, the more you find out that, oh, even though we're all on the same side, we don't agree on everything. And that was hard too. And that for me was very stressful because I felt like I finally found what I know is backed by research in terms of how to teach reading, but we can't all agree on the specifics. And that was troubling. I think listening to different people acknowledge that not every question is answered was helpful for me. One of the biggest, most useful voices for me was that of Steve Dykstra, who is a school psychologist and a national speaker. He's actually lives like 45 minutes from me, so in my neck of the woods. I've enjoyed listening to him talk about how, the science of reading doesn't prescribe everything you do every moment. There's not enough science to do that. So understanding that has been helpful. Also, speaking to other experts who acknowledge that there's some things we know from research, some things we have research is leaning in this direction, and then some things we really hasn't been tested have all been helpful things for me to think about. And also realizing that no matter who we are, we have a bias towards something, whether we're a scientist or a teacher or someone who's trying to be a translator, we all have our biases. And so that's going to come out. And if we can just accept that that's the fact and learn to sort through the noise, which is what I'm trying to learn to do, I think that's the best place to be.
Definitely. I had a podcast episode with Dr. Jane Ashby. She's affiliated with Mount St. Joseph University. And one of the things that she said to me that has stuck with me really is that when there's conflicting or opposing views in the research, it takes a long time for the science to settle. And what we need is that time and the repetitions in the research to have converging research, for the research to converge and come together to come to a consensus. And if it doesn't, sometimes it means that both are true, and it depends on for whom and in what scenarios. And so I think to look at science with this critical eye, and that it is factual, but it may not be this black and white situation for all of your students all of the time.
Yeah, and just the point you just made was such a good one too for me to understand. That was that this idea that converging evidence, that's why studies need to be replicable so that someone else can do it, because you might get different results in different situations. And it takes a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of willing people that are willing to, number one, design the study, and then do the work, get the people that will participate, publish it. Like, it's not a simple process. So we should expect that it's going to take a while to get the research that we want. And typically what we want is, I just want research to support this thing that I'm doing. Like, I totally get that. I know it's the wrong way to look at it. It should be more about learning from the research, learning those principles, and then designing practices that apply those principles, I think, is something to think about.
Does forming your skill-based groups feel a little mysterious? You have the screening data, but you're still asking, okay, how do I use this to move students forward? A good friend of the podcast, Dr. Stephanie Staller, runs the Reading Science Academy, and she created an exclusive grouping resource bundle free for Literacy in Color listeners. You'll get Stephanie's cheat sheets for grouping students at the beginning, middle, and end of the year, plus a video that walks you through a real classroom example. I'll always proclaim that I myself am a proud Reading Science Academy member for life, and I can genuinely say that the quality of the resources and professional learning is top notch. The Facebook community is also one of the most supportive spaces I've experienced. Reading Science Academy is honestly one of the first places I go whenever I have a question about literacy instruction or assessment. So go to readingscienceacademy.com/color to get your free grouping resource bundle today. Yeah. And it also speaks to like instructional leaders and how they can promote conversations in their buildings, because I've had teachers say to me like, "Oh, my principal says that everything I have to do has to be evidence-based." Well, that's just not possible. That's not possible. Your roll and read might not have a randomized control study behind
Exactly.
it.
Exactly. Thank you. Yes. And I've heard the same thing. Like, I'll get an email. I got the exact same thing. My principal said everything I do has to be research based. And then I'll get questions that are good questions, but I don't think research will ever answer them. Like, what's the exact time of the day that I should be doing phonics lessons? And there are other things that maybe research will tease out, but it's things like, what's better when we're doing word chaining? Should we use letter tiles or should kids write on whiteboards? Like, there might be a study that looked at a program that used whiteboards, right? But did they tease it out? Did they just compare that to, probably that's not going to happen. So we're not going to find the things that we want always. We have to learn the general principles and then work from that. And then always, of course, we're progress monitoring and we're checking to see if our students are meeting goals. Like if we're not doing ongoing assessment, then we really have no idea whether it's backed by research or not, if it's working, right? Because just because something works for a population of kids doesn't mean it's going to work for every single child.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And then so when we think about this overarching term, the science of reading, how can it inform our instructional decisions on this kind of global scale, and what might it not tell us?
Yeah, so I mean, I like to think about the really big things that we know. And sometimes you can just find that from reading a meta-analysis, right? But I was reading a meta-analysis about comprehension a couple months ago, and I wanted it to tell me this is how much time you should spend on this every day. These are the exact reading comprehension strategies you should teach, and this is how you should teach them. It didn't say that. It said more general things like it's useful to teach vocabulary, that kids should learn about text structure. It didn't say this graphic organizer is the one to use. So I think we need to know these general principles, which you can learn from lots of people. I think listening to podcasts with experts that we can trust is a really good place to start. And then from that, making sure that what we're doing makes sense according to what we know. And that's tricky because we have a program we're required to use, and maybe not every single element of that program has been tested. Probably not. Probably hasn't been tested. We have to be wise consumers and think about, does this make sense based on what we know, or does this feel like a waste of time? Am I not seeing the results I want to see in my students? And then you need to talk to your school about it, right? So it shouldn't just be individual teachers. Well, I'm going to throw this out. I'm going to throw that out. It requires frequent conversations because we owe it to our students not only to use evidence-based materials when we can, research-based materials also, but then we need to make sure there's consistency. So if I am doing this, it doesn't make sense to me, I need to talk to the other first grade teachers or the second grade teachers or the interventionist and discuss what are we going to do as a group? Because if I'm deciding that this particular thing doesn't make sense, but then they're going into second grade and that teacher's going to do it, or I'm sending them to intervention and you're going to do it, we've got to get on the same page for the sake of everyone. And that's not a simple process. It requires a routine of meeting with other teachers to discuss the things that we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easy to say I can close my door and shut my blinds and do what's best for kids. But if there isn't that horizontal alignment and vertical alignment, then you were a one-hit wonder teacher who may have done wonderful things, but what happens the next year? So I'm glad that you said that. And I really appreciate you getting into that. Sometimes the nitty-gritty isn't answered for us. And sometimes if a routine is backed by research, it doesn't even mean that's the only way it can be done. Maybe another routine just hasn't been explored yet. So That being said, there are a lot of hot topics in the science of reading community, and social media has really intensified these hot topics by making things sound very black and white and polarizing. So I'd love to explore a few of these with you, and maybe we can dive into what are the differing views regarding the topic
Mhm.
and what's even worth our instructional time when we think about our decisions as educators. And the first big bucket I'd like to get into is sight words or high frequency words, right? So we know that there's this theory of orthographic mapping and how we can store words for instant automatic retrieval. And years ago, out popped the heart word method, where we're looking at the parts that are phonetically regular and perhaps just thinking about the part we have to know by heart and putting a heart over it, or realizing this is the tricky part that requires our attention to memorize that part. So with that being said, this has become a heart word craze. There's hearts plastered all over the place. And so I'd love your opinion on this approach.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to put out a disclaimer and say that this is what are we, April 2026?
Yeah.
Like if anyone's listening to this in April 2027, I'll probably have a different opinion about a lot of these things because I'm just going to share my perspective on where I see things right now and fully understanding that I'm going to keep learning and see different things just like you are. And just like my answers would have been different a year ago. So just keep that in mind. This is my perspective. But I think heart words are an immense improvement of what we used to do, right? Because I remember I didn't know any clue how to teach kids high frequency words. And I called them sight words. And I remember my first year of teaching first grade, I had been teaching middle grades and I was teaching primary. And I thought, okay, now I'm going to learn how to teach kids to read. And I got my master's degree then. And I'm sad to say it was all balanced literacy. So I really didn't learn very much. But I didn't know what to do with her. She'd spent 2 years in kindergarten and didn't know her letters and sounds. It's so sad. I did not do much blending work with her. We had pattern books and I was just trying to get her to learn some sight words, quote, sight words. And one of them was the, and I just remember just like writing it all over the paper and just like, read it here, read it here. It didn't stick at all. So that was a problem, right? And you can even find things online that say how to teach sight words. Just show the word and say, this is the, say it, the. We don't want to do that. So it's really great that we're moving away from that. I think that's really good. One thing to think about with heart words is we pretty much put the heart there when it's phonetically different from what we would expect. But when we understand that English is not supposed to be always phonetic, it's morphophonemic, we might be overdoing the hearts, right? Then it gets to be the question of teachers will say, well, what gets a heart in this word and what doesn't? You'll see that in the big Facebook groups, which is totally fair. They're just embracing this new approach and they want to know how to do it right, quote, right. But there's not a right way to do heart words. It's more about what are you doing that is helping kids connect the sounds to the letters and sound out the word so they can remember it for the future and understand that that's the whole point. So what you do to get them there might be different for different children. And it might be different based on teacher knowledge. I think that's really important to remember too. Like there's this tendency to look down your nose at teachers who don't know things like that English words don't end in V. Someone will say in the group, oh, you have to put a heart over the E because it's not have, and someone else will say, well, English words don't end in V, so you don't need a heart. As if we should all know this. Well, we all come to this knowledge at different times. And maybe for that teacher, it gets a heart. But as they learn more, they're going to adjust what they do. The other thing about heart words is you're supposed to use a heart if it's before you've taught it in your scope and sequence, right? But I think sometimes it just makes sense to just teach that thing because it's not hard and they're going to encounter it a lot. An example would be EE, as in the word see. Like, do we really need to use a heart over EE in kindergarten when that's a very common pattern that they're going to see in other words, like the green on their crayon, Maybe we can just tell them EE spells E, the end, right? So it does not have to be hard and fast. I think that's just a fact. And so teachers need to realize this is a tool to help kids learn these words, but it's not necessarily a right or wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I'm a fan of the heart word method. I've used it myself. Before the heart word method came out, I used to do something similar. I used to draw like a squiggle line underneath the graphic that would be unusual.
Okay.
That was what I had a training in at
Yeah.
one point in my intervention space where you were doing the same thing. You were pointing out what's the tricky part. What I worry about is like this idea of like, let's just put hearts everywhere. And essentially we're getting to this place of, oh, let's just memorize every word anyway.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas
Yes,
I
good
think
point.
there's so much value in how you were saying, let's notice a name. EE says E and just tell them. Just tell them we don't have to memorize this part, but to know that we're going to learn this more explicitly down the road. But at this point, I'm going to tell you that as well. And I think there's value in both. Like a word like of we're going to have to just memorize it. But we can point out those grapheme phoneme connections. Like it sounds like a v, but it's spelled OF. OF spells of.
Yes. And one thing else I want to say, I think we need to be careful too. And I don't know if this is happening because I really don't know, but we don't want to be adding to students' cognitive load like they have to remember where the hearts go.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that's happening, but that would be a concern of mine. Not only do you have to remember how to read this, but you have to remember how to mark it up. We don't need to be doing that. It's just a tool.
Definitely. And essentially, it should be like your own understanding of, I need help with this part. Your
Exactly.
hearts might be different than my hearts. And
Mm-hmm.
what's going to help that kid get to the end result of reading and spellings. And then keeping in line with high frequency words, there's also this notion that there's no word that is truly irregular. Every word can be explained somehow, whether we look at the morphology or etymology. So, what are your thoughts on that kind of approach?
Yeah, that is so hard because, again, I think it so much depends on teacher knowledge and nobody's going to know everything all at once, even the experts. Okay, so think about the word could, right? So we know that could is spelled the same as would and should because those words are related to will and shall, which have L's, and that at some point they decide, I don't remember when, but they decided, let's just make could spelled the same way because it matches these, even though there's no connection to the letter L. So does that mean that could is irregular or does that mean it's not because we know why it's spelled that way? Like what exactly does irregular mean? I think that's one thing. I think we need to let go of this idea that irregular means when the phonics pattern, when it doesn't match the way it sounds, because that's not how English works. It's not supposed to a lot of the time. So I think we need to let go of that idea that if it doesn't match the way we speak it, then it's irregular. It's crazy. We need to let go of that. But I think we also need to have some grace for teachers who haven't learned all the reasons for all the spellings. And at the same way, though, I think all of us need to let go of the English is crazy line. That just needs to go away. Even maybe the word tricky, maybe we need to modify that. I'm not sure. But it's just we need to be careful about how we communicate about English. Like English is complex and wonderful. It's not crazy and weird. If we can help our students understand that, we can give them more comfort in knowing we can figure this out. This isn't a guessing game all the time.
Yeah, that was great. And I think you hit the nail on the head saying, like, from the beginning, we should be teaching students, it's not just phonology. And I think that's the message that a lot of early literacy educators get is like, we just have to teach the grapheme phoneme correspondences and then they'll crack the code. And yeah, it's so much more complex than that. And we have evidence of that earlier on. A word like does, where we could look at the structure and sounds have changed, pronunciations have changed throughout history, but the spelling is consistent. But what I do worry about with the rise of etymology and things like that gaining popularity, and trust me, I'm a huge fan of this. I love, this is my jam. I love to teach teachers about this knowledge, but I also think we need to be really mindful of how we're spending our instructional time. And we can't spend half an hour digging into history lesson. And sometimes what I see too is like teachers on social media teaching all their students about Scribble O. And now like all of a sudden they have like a huge Scribble O lesson. And this is someone I saw with over 1 million followers. The word that she chose for Scribble O wasn't even Scribble O word. It happened to have a pattern that O says So we have to be careful consumers of that kind of information as well. Like if you're going to share about it, then know it. And it's okay if you don't know it. Teachers aren't linguists, but like gain a little knowledge bit by bit, anchor with a story when it's helpful, anchor with a story for students who really need it. Some students will just learn OF spells of, and that's it. And some students might need a little extra tip to help them anchor the spelling. So there's nuance there as well.
I appreciate that. And I also think when we learn all this information, it's very exciting. And we may think we have to share everything with our students. This is where people disagree, right? What is useful for students? What is useful for teachers? And this is where I think there's room for disagreement. And I don't like it when there's one side that insists on this is something that is worth teaching and this isn't. I think we just have to be thoughtful about what is our goal. Our goal is that all of our students become proficient readers and spellers. I think sometimes we just talk about reading, but I think we need to think about both. And what's the most efficient way to get them there? It may not be the fastest way is the most efficient because then maybe we're losing something. Maybe we're losing the spelling. But I think we need to find a happy medium and we're not always doing that.
Yeah. And so many of those conversations I'm hearing even more recently, like we're overdoing the phonics. We'll get to that in a minute too. But it's the same idea of like, does a student have to define what a fricative is? probably not, you know?
I would agree. I would agree.
All right, let's get into another hot topic, and this gets into teaching foundational skills for our students. So, one of the things that people are very passionate about, I think even more than phonics, is phonemic awareness. And there's this idea of perhaps we're overdoing it. Maybe we're overdoing this oral only phonemic awareness. So, in your opinion, is oral only PA ever okay?
So this is one of the reasons that I'm getting my PhD because I have a lot of voices that I respect on both sides that disagree on this publicly, and it's hard for me. So I do not have a good answer for you yet. What I will say is that again, we're trying to get kids to be proficient readers and spellers, and we need to ask: is long oral only phonemic awareness routines, are they getting us there? And I think that's a good question because I'm not sure they are. But then there's also like people will say you never ever ever do phonemic awareness without letters. Like, well, my understanding is that when the National Reading Panel made that recommendation using letters, that a lot of the programs that were in the studies that they got that recommendation from were oral only for a large portion of the instruction. And then by the end, they added letters. And those programs were included in the use letters recommendation, even though they started oral. So where are we getting, I don't know. Where are we getting this recommendation that it's only with letters? I'm not sure. So that would be a question I would have. Like, if I was really going to try to nail this down, I would ask, where exactly are those studies so I can look at them really closely? Because I'm just not sure that they're there. But I don't know for sure. Like I said, voices both sides telling me different things. Like, to me, it makes sense to do a warm up before a phonics lesson for 1 minute. You know, I mean, I don't have a problem with that. Also, when I have teachers who email me and say the student just can't blend these, they just can't even blend two sounds. Well, doesn't it make sense to back up and do it oral a little bit? I mean, that just makes sense to me. Do we have to say, well, someone told me never to do oral, so we're just not going to do that? Like, mm. I talked to Lindsay Kemney about this once. I always appreciate her nuance as well. And she was talking about, I don't want to quote her directly and say that this is exactly what she said, but I think what she said was when she has students who can't even blend phonemes together, she backs up and has them put together syllables. Even though we're told that the development of phonological awareness is not a stair-step model, that we don't have to master syllables before we get to phonemes. And yet, she has found that some kids, when they just get this concept of putting things together with the bigger chunks, it was helpful. It was a scaffold. So it's so much of educating yourself and then testing it out with individual kids. I think this is one of those where people need to be more clear about what specific studies have told us versus just saying, well, research says. Because that's why I don't really say it, because I'm not sure. I'd really have to nail it down.
Yeah. And this is something that I think I got lost in because of social media, because in my intervention background, I did do some oral only PA often. And this is what the readers who struggled the most, and I found success with it. Then I think out comes like this science of reading movement, and everyone's like, we need to do PA. And like now everybody has like a 15-minute phonemic awareness program disconnected from phonics. And I think that's where like this tricky conversation lies. And this is like the nuance of for whom as well. And my worry is when we're like, oh, phonemic awareness always needs to be attached to letters. It never should be oral. It's like, are we going to now leave our dyslexic students behind, the ones who have a phonological core deficit, who really, really need this work, just because the mainstream students who, you know, in the past with balanced literacy never had PUA and they never really needed it because they got those skills through the active reading and writing anyway. So this is where we have to look at our students and their individual needs too. And so I guess for the classroom teachers, like to be mindful and keep it quick, but also like make sure you make that transfer into phonics. And so it's not disconnected as well.
I think back to your point about the 15-minute program, I think two things we need to keep in mind when we're choosing practices also is cost in terms of time and money, right? So the program I know you're referring to, I don't think is very expensive, but sometimes we have to think about time. Are we spending 15 minutes a day on something that isn't evidence-based? So evidence-based, we know actually it's been proven to work versus the principles of research, right? Like we know that phonemic awareness is important, but is this particular program evidence-based? That's to me where we really need to be able to support that, because 15 minutes a day is a lot when you add it up. We need to keep in mind time and money. Those are in short supply. And if we are not being careful with them because we just think something might work or because a program told us to do it, we need to think more about that.
Yeah. And also viewing what kind of knowledge our students have about letter sound relationships too. So like 15 minutes a day in pre-K, I would love that. My daughter right now is in preschool. She's only 3 years old, but, like, if they did phonemic awareness for 10 minutes a day, I think that would be great. She's
Mhm,
not reading,
mhm,
she doesn't know her letters, but you're just having that sound play. It also depends on your age of development too, of, like, when you tie the print in.
mhm. Yeah, good point.
And then when we think about phonics instruction, there's also different camps of different approaches to teach these letter sound relationships. So we might have like a traditional phonics approach might be based in the Orton-Gillingham method. And more popularly, there's this structured linguistic literacy, kind of this speech to print approach. So is one the gold standard? Is one better than the other? Should we be leaning towards one approach over the other?
Yeah. So again, if someone has this study, I would like to see it because I'm not saying it's not there. I'm not aware of a study that compares the two, right? So I'm sure, I know there's research that supports both approaches. Is there a study that pitted the two against each other, we could say? And I don't think that's something researchers really want to do. So I don't know that will ever happen. So some people say, well, that's not going to happen. So if you're waiting for that, that's the wrong thing to be waiting for. But if we want to claim that one route is superior, we need that, right? So if you want to say that your approach is the only best way, you need to have that study to prove it. You can certainly say that this is an efficient way, this is an effective way, but let's not pit them against each other. I think that's not fair to teachers who maybe have been given a particular program. And I also am not a fan of any approaches that tell you to just trust the process or trust the person in charge of it. I don't want to put my trust in a person when I've got these kids that I'm working with here. I want to trust what the research says, and then I'm going to trust my data, right? So I think I'm always wary of any approach that wants you to do everything an exact certain way with no wiggle room. And that can be said for both sides. There are different leaders in both sides that will tell you, you have to do it exactly this way. And I just don't go there. I don't like it when people say these are the only tools. You only need my tools. I don't agree. It's also true that teachers can be overloaded with tools and they're not being consistent with their tools and they're grabbing the next shiny tool. I totally get that. I'm certainly guilty of doing things like that. So that's also something to be careful of. But that's where we get back to working with your team. What are we going to do? And if someone finds something that they found effective, then share it with your team and maybe you can all try it. I don't think we should be afraid of learning new things or trying new things, but I think we need to remember that we're not, like you said, I think we should let go of the old days of I'm doing the right thing for my students all by myself and shutting my door. I mean, that may be the case in some situations where sadly there's still balanced literacy. And I know that it is still happening in some places. But when we're all understanding the importance of research-based or evidence-based approaches, we need to be a team. And back to those two different approaches, I think there's things I like from both. Like I've taken trainings on both. I am Orton-Gillingham certified, even though I really don't think of myself as promoting Orton-Gillingham, the Orton-Gillingham methods. I think some of the things I've learned from that I really like. Other things I think, I don't think that's the best use of our time. And also, I should say that with structured linguistic literacy, there's a lot of different programs and a lot of different ways of doing it. It's not just like this is one way, just the same thing as traditional phonics. There's a million different ways to look at it. I'm seeing like elements of SLL kind of coming into a lot of traditional programs, right? Like sound mapping and less rigid syllable division, less of a focus on syllable types. And then there's also language. Like I'll hear people say, well, we don't teach rules. And yet I see them teaching a pattern, calling it a pattern, but it's the same as the rule.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think so much of it has to be hype for people to sell and has to be controversial on both sides. And so because of that, it can be hard to sort through the nuance.
Yeah, definitely. And I like to view structured literacy as this big umbrella that a lot of different approaches can live under. We go back to this idea of the science of reading. This is the research that's informing us on how the brain is learning. And you might get there taking one road, and I might get there taking
Mm-hmm.
another road, and we both get there.
Mm-hmm.
It's still supporting the research of the reading brain, but the implementation might be different. I really appreciate your take on that. We have to stop pitting the sides against each other until we have the cold hard facts that
Mm-hmm.
one is one is better than the other. And so we already alluded to this idea of overdoing phonics. This has even come out by some researchers or respected voices in the field saying, oh boy, we're doing too much. So do you think that this idea is valid?
Yeah, that has been a hot topic of late as we record this episode, because there was recently an article that I think maybe on a Substack that someone put out about this,
Mhm.
which I read. And then Mark Seidenberg has said, we're overdoing it. I think if someone's going to say that, they better have a solution ready. So don't just put something out there for people to chew on or people to be offended by and then don't help. So I just want to say that right out there, put that out there. I think it is definitely a conversation worth having, though. Having said that, I can't remember. I read that article by that person who wrote it was helpful. Like, I feel like they had some good thoughts. I can't quote it, so I don't remember. So I don't want to make it sound like they didn't. But I think what we have to be careful, though, is who we say that to, because I still get emails from people whose school is doing balanced literacy, who are still using pattern books to teach reading in kindergarten. I don't want them to hear that. If people are already not wanting to do phonics and then they hear we're over teaching it, how does that help? I think some people have this false idea that we've won the reading wars and that everybody now understands the importance of phonics. It's not true. I wish it were, but it's not. So we have to be careful. That said, we can absolutely go too far on the other side. I think we have in some places. When I taught first grade, so I taught middle grades first, third, fourth, and fifth grade. Then I moved down to first grade. I had to use a very structured phonics program. It was called Saxon Phonics, and it's still out there, I think. And that was when I did not at all believe in explicit phonics instruction. I thought it was a waste of time. And we had to do this elaborate marking up of words. It was crazy. Then I was Orton Gillingham trained, and we did some of that, although even not to the extent that we did in the Saxon. And I hated it so much. I thought this was such a huge waste of time because I had kids who could read the words without the marking up, and then the kids who couldn't read without marking up, it was too much. So it maybe fit like a middle group. It's also true I didn't have the understanding of the importance of explicit phonics instruction. So I got the permission to throw it out, and I stopped using it, and I just did like more hit or miss phonics then for the next couple of years with my leveled books. That said, when I learned how to do this in my Orton Gillingham training, it took like 15 minutes a day of our lesson of underlining the vowels, drawing the bridge, looking up, finding the consonants, remembering the pattern, VCV, VCCV, dividing, labeling the syllable types, and then sounding it out, and then always having to flex anyway, right? To me, if you're going to do something like that, that's expensive in terms of time, and you should have evidence that this is really useful, right? I should say superior to a less time-intensive procedure, right? Because there are programs that use that have been shown to be successful, but at what cost of time for this particular element? I don't think they've teased out that particular thing, right? So I've landed on what I call PUDs in my membership. I couldn't come up with a better name, but, and this wasn't my idea, but peeling off the prefixes and suffixes that they know, but they may not know them, but if they recognize them, peel them off, underline the vowels in what's left, divide into syllables, and then say the word and then flex if needed. And I recently saw some videos. Her name is Katie Huller. I think it's like All Kids Can Read and Write or something website. But her YouTube videos, the tricky part is knowing where to divide, right? And what she teaches is you basically glue the underlined vowel to the next grapheme and divide. Even if that isn't, what would match the dictionary, just so they always know what to do. And then you flex it. So if you try this with different words, like let's say the word October, if you follow that routine, you're actually going to divide OC, divide TOB, because it's the next grapheme after the divide ER. Well, if you read that phonetically, it would be October, but you can just teach them to flex the vowel. Like when you make that part of your routine, October, and then we don't have to sit there and think about all the different rules for how we divide. We can just have a strategy we stick to and then flex it. I think to me that makes so much more sense. And that's what I would encourage teachers to do. Other things in terms of overteaching phonics, like memorizing blends. Of course, I think when this first became a thing and people were like, don't teach blends, I was like, what do you mean? Of course, kids need to be able to read blends. And what I meant was they need to be able to read CCVC words. Like those are harder than CVC words. And then I finally realized, that's not what they're saying. They're saying, don't teach them to memorize bits of code. They shouldn't have to look at a flashcard and say bull, fur, because then they say fra, blah. That makes sense to me. So decreasing the amount of code we have to learn, but giving them practice with those patterns. And then the syllable type thing, like, that's a hard one because when people learn about that, it's so exciting. Like, I didn't know this. And now it's almost like a math problem. Like it's just screaming at me. It all makes sense to me now. When I look at the words, I see these types. And some people really have I was talking to a friend of mine who's on the Wisconsin Reading League board with me. And she remembers teaching this to a teenage boy, I think, back in the day when she worked at a dyslexia center. And he loved it. He was like, give me some more of those words. So he could break them down and read them because he could never see a pattern. So this was really helpful to him. But then again, is it useful to divide words up and label how much time is this taking? I don't think we should have to teach syllable types, but are we losing something if we don't teach them? I'm not sure. I like to think of it as more of patterns that we teach and not naming them. Like, of course, we teach the CVCE pattern, right? Or VCE pattern. Of course, we teach kids to read R-controlled vowels. Of course, we teach kids to read diphthongs. As soon as you teach the pattern, putting it in longer words. right away and teaching kids that they can tackle these longer words as long as they can read the patterns, not needing to label them. But like I said, teachers are excited about this. And so to find out that something they just learned, now they're not supposed to do it is disheartening.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know in the beginning of this whole science of reading movement, people on the balanced literacy camp would say, oh, just wait for the next pendulum swing. And
Mm-hmm.
I would always be like, no, it's not a pendulum. It should not be a pendulum swing. Like, this is the science. This is just the way it is. And it's almost this idea like we just need to cut the string so the pendulum falls, because it shouldn't be this idea of like we're doing too much and then like we go back to balanced literacy or a whole language and teach kids to guess again. But there is this idea of like tightening things up and seeing like refining our practice maybe and seeing like what really is going to move the needle. And like maybe in the beginning we are a little intense because teachers have this newfound knowledge and with excitement and learning about patterns and such. But I think you're so right. I think we need to be more flexible and less rigid about these patterns. And for me, like syllable types, when people are like, don't teach syllable types, I'm like, well, if you're teaching a scope and sequence, aren't you just teaching syllable types? It's
Right,
like,
exactly.
go
That's what
to
I
the
think
next
too.
pattern.
Even if you don't
Uh,
call them that, you're doing that,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. But I agree with you with the coding. I think that can be overboard, especially once you get into multisyllabic territory and the schwa comes in and all of a sudden something that looks like a closed syllable isn't anymore.
Right, right.
We can't we can't get so, bent up over that. It might work in the single syllables and then all of a sudden we need to be flexible. So
Mhm.
having this lax idea, it's important, but we don't have to go crazy about coding words.
And just remembering what we know for sure and what we get to decide, right? I mean, we're
Yeah.
deciding everything, but we know for sure like systematic phonics instruction is better than embedded phonics or
Mhm.
haphazard phonics. But how we carry that out, we really need to think about what's effective and efficient for reading and spelling.
Definitely, definitely. And then another thing, another hot topic is if somebody was in the balanced literacy camp, they know that that leveled library was their pride and joy. And as science of reading gained popularity, there would even be people saying like, throw all your leveled books away. Decodables are the only way. But is there room for less controlled texts in the primary classroom or elementary grades? And can you shed on light on the nuance there as well?
Yeah, so that's something I'm still working through because I know SLL approaches will say that they get kids into authentic text much more quickly. And I think that's a positive. I still don't quite understand how that works when you're not working individually with the child, but I think there is a cost to being in decodables for too long. And that is not having the flexibility that we need with the English language and just, keeping kids from more authentic text. That said, I think there's a difference between the like levels A, B, C, and or even D and the rest, right?
Mhm.
I've got to wonder what value there really is in those early pattern books, those early predictable pattern books. I almost think those are better just cut up and used for pictures or use the sentence and use it to talk about grammar. I don't think once kids can read, do they really want to go back and read, I see a giraffe, I see a lion? Probably not. But once you get past that, they can be useful, especially for topics, right? So if you have a text set about machines, maybe you have like a level E book about different machines and things they do, and kids just might enjoy reading that very quickly, enjoying the pictures and everything. I think there's a really good blog post about this by Margaret Goldberg, who writes such good blog posts on her Right to Read project website about what to do with these predictable pattern books. I recommend anybody go over and look at that. She has ideas for how to reuse those. But in general, I think, no, we shouldn't be getting rid of them. I think we should not be afraid of kids seeing words they haven't learned to decode. When I use Saxon phonics, and this is, again, pre me believing in systematic phonics, but one thing that really annoyed me was they had to take home this coding worksheets where they had to code the words up, but there were no instructions on them. And the reason was we don't want kids to try to read words that we haven't taught them. But they also made the math program, which had instructions on it. This is dumb. It makes no sense at all. It's not like we're just going to cover their eyes when they go out in public. Don't try to read the sign. Don't try to read anything. And yet we also know we want their first plan of attack is to try to sound the word out. So if a kid is using pictures or looking at the teacher instead of the word, well, yeah, they really need to have more controlled text. But so many kids can move out of that pretty quickly. I found it was really special. I found in my Google pic photos the other day just showed up, and it was my son who's now 10. I just happened to snap a picture of him reading a decodable book when he was just first learning to read, before he started kindergarten, when I was teaching him the structural literacy way. I finally figured that out. And he was like, tin is but it, big. And he's just reading to himself. It was so cute and sweet. But I remember that very quickly after that, like a month or two, he was already in non-decodable on his own. He was figuring out a lot of the words. So was I going to say, well, you have to be in decodable until we've learned all your phonics patterns for the next 2 years? Like, no. But he was already working through the patterns himself. Now, if you have somebody who's been taught in one hand to use predictable pattern books, yeah, you may take some time to do some reteaching. So the bottom line is, Michelle, I don't have a good answer for this, except I'm still studying it. And I think we need to let go of this false idea that a book has to be 100% decodable for kids to use it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's the nuance of we don't want to teach students to read within a pattern and you're cueing them from the beginning to guess at words by looking at the picture or thinking about context rather than looking at the word as the clue. But there's also this nuance of like, when do we let go of the two-wheeler bike without the training wheels? How do we flex them and stretch them to get better? I know you also had Jennifer Thronson on your podcast. I had her as a guest, and she shares like a wonderful decodable text routine in her book, Raising Up Readers, but she also shares the importance of stretching them with a little complex text. And the teacher's going to be at the scaffold. We're not going to leave them to their own devices to try to figure out all these tricky words on their own, but we're going to support them to get to that point. So it's art. It is art, and it's going to be different for every kid. There's not going to be like, poof, you read this many decodables and now you're ready for more authentic text. I had the same kind of experience with my older daughter. She's in kindergarten and I taught her how to read before she got to school and doing a lot of CBC work. And just recently, she picks up a book off the bookshelf and she's reading it. She's reading the book. It's not easy for her, but like she's picking up patterns. And these are things that she hasn't learned in phonics yet. But it just goes to show like our brains are pattern seekers. And maybe my daughter is the kid who would have learned to read anyway without like too much explicit instruction. But meanwhile, she did get explicit instruction earlier on. But there's the kid who's going to need more support. And we have to take all of that, I think, into consideration. Like leveled books aren't bad. It's just a book. But we shouldn't place kids in those levels.
Yes, that's a whole other conversation for sure.
Yeah. All right. I want to tackle one more hot topic if you're down, and that would be sound walls. So this is another thing that has gained so much popularity. And I think one of the things that also gets a lot of buzz is the mouths. Some people have clip art mouths. Some people have photographs of mouths. And are the mouths helpful? Are they a waste of wall space? What are your thoughts?
Oh, this is a hard one because this is another one I don't know for sure. Like I hear a lot of big, strong voices have different opinions and I struggle with it. One voice talks a lot about how it's not an evidence-based strategy. So it's not backed by research. So don't use them. And I don't think that should be the argument because lots of things we do haven't been teased out by research. So I think she would probably have more reasons than that I don't fully understand because I don't have her background knowledge. But I think that reason alone is not the reason. Okay. Because there are teachers who find them useful. Like they will say, this actually is a good tool for me and my students. They will actually use it when they're writing. They will try to figure out what grapheme they need and they will feel the sound in their mouth and they will look up and find the matching mouth picture because I've taught them how to do that. And this is a useful tool for them. There are others will say, oh, we're supposed to have a sound wall and it takes up so much space. We never look at it. We never talk about it. Well, then they shouldn't have one, right? If it's just taking up space and no one's using it, well, then yeah, don't use it. I think sound walls became very popular because for whatever reason, they were the thing that was kind of front and center when the science of reading, quote, became the thing, right? Like 6 or 7 years ago. Like there were sound walls everywhere. And so that's what people globbed onto. Like, oh, this is the science of reading, which is not what it is, but that's what people would say. And so I have to have this. So I'm doing, quote, the science of reading. And so I think that's where it started. But I think if we're going to use them, we need to understand why. And to me, they're a tool for building phonemic awareness, phonics, and spelling practices. If the teacher knows how to use them and uses them well. Now, if we're spending 10 minutes a day teaching kids to differentiate between fricatives or lip poppers or whatever we want to call them, I do question that. Is that useful? If you're going to be spending 10 minutes a day on that, you need to be able to show that that's worth your time. But if you're using it as a tool and you just introduce these cards as you teach, I don't see why that has to be a problem. I think everybody has their thing they get hung up on, right? Like for some people, we don't use mouth pictures and that's their thing. They just want everybody to know that and they'll say it high and loud wherever they go. If someone comments on it in a Facebook group, they'll paste their little thing about why we shouldn't use mouth pictures. Other people, we shouldn't learn syllable types and they'll paste that everywhere. We all have our thing and that's totally fine to have our thing that we get excited about. But I think we need to always be listening to teachers who say, well, you tell me there's no research for this, but I've seen it work. We'll have that conversation. I think we need to have those conversations versus shutting people down. I think, again, it goes back to the time and money, right? So if you have a resource that wasn't very expensive and you're not spending 15 minutes a day on it, but you're using it as a helpful tool, then go for it. On the other hand, if you're spending a lot of money on any program or any resource and you're not convinced this is useful and you don't have data to show it, then you need to rethink this.
I like how you said, let's not shut down the teacher who is finding it successful, because I think we can often do that a lot. Again, I think it's going back to that initial thing, like, is what you're doing helping build the reading brain? And at the end of the day, that's what we want to be doing. And you said it so nicely so many times. We want these practices to be promoting solid readers and spellers and writers. And sometimes the nuance is there, and we just have to acknowledge that it exists and it's okay.
And back to what you said a minute ago, like I like to distinguish between research-based and evidence-based, right? So like evidence-based, it's been proven, that specific thing has been proven. But, when you think about research-based, if we can talk about the principles from what we know from the research that, kids need phonemic awareness, they need to match sounds to letters, they need to use phonemic awareness as they decode and as they spell. And this tool helps them with that, then I think we can call that research-based. We may not call it evidence-based because maybe it hasn't been teased out or hasn't been studied. But I think we need to have a lot more flexibility when it comes to research-based. I'll give you another example is fluency pyramids.
Yeah.
Right? So there's two voices I really love and respect, both of them, and one hates them and one loves them. Well, what are teachers supposed to do with that, right? Now, I have not heard either one of them say, you shouldn't use it or you should use it. I think they're open that this is my opinion and this is how I use it. And I think that's great. I think those are the voices we need to listen to. The people that freely share their opinions, but also hopefully acknowledge that you could have a different one if this has not been teased out.
I love that. That's a great example. And those are the things that come up in those science of reading Facebook groups, what I should have learned in college.
Mm-hmm.
Is this activity okay based in the research? And like we said in the beginning, a lot of time, those nitty gritty activities, there's not going to be a science behind it. It's just 5 minutes of your day.
That's when I think, I know we say we're not supposed to get our research from anecdotes, but I think that's where the anecdotes are useful. That's where we talk to other teachers. And I think it's useful to hear from teachers that say, no, my kids just memorized the words, or yeah, it really helped them map these words. Like it was really useful, or it's useful for these kids, but not for these kids. I think those are all good conversations to have.
Yeah. And that's why at the end of the day, teaching will always be science and art. We can't take the art out of it too.
Absolutely. And I think that can get lost. And that is so important to remember, that it's the science of learning married to the science of reading is really important.
Yeah. And I love how now like this implementation science is becoming more and more prominent, because I think that's where the marriage of the science of reading is really going to become alive and helping teachers make instructional decisions more wisely as well.
Yes.
For a lot of this nuance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So as you reflect on your journey, what's a belief or practice inside of structured literacy that you've since refined? You said in the beginning, if we listen to this episode a year from now, maybe you'll change your mind. And a year ago, you probably would have said something different as well.
Yeah. Well, I think for one of them, the big one probably is the syllable division thing, because I did learn a very rigid way of doing it. And the more I learn, the more I'm like, I just don't really think that's necessary. And I think it can be cognitive overload. And I also think it's time intensive. And that's the thing that concerns me the most, but also that it doesn't work half the time. Because like you said, with the schwa. So that's something that when teachers ask me about teaching kids to read longer words, I don't promote syllable type division strategies anymore, like VCCV. It's more, I do promote a strategy, but it's a very flexible one. And then I'm working through the proper place of decodable and authentic text in the early grades. Like, what does that look like? Like, when do we start giving kids, reader's theater scripts that aren't, quote, decodable or written to be decodable? Like, how much of that can be the teacher, as Jen Thronson says, fast mapping the words, like just telling them what the word is? How much of that is useful? How can we tell? Like, I don't know. That's something I'm trying to work through.
Yeah. And I think that's the next wave of science of reading, as I hear a lot more people talking about complex text and how that fits into this whole conversation. And even when we look at our assessments, like this whole idea of reading a grade level passage on how do we get there if we're only working on decodables? So Yeah, I'm interested as well. So I'm on this journey with you, Anna.
Yes, it's wonderful. It's great to have friends to talk through things with because we struggle with wrapping our brain around what different people are saying and disagreeing about, and it's just good to talk it out.
Definitely. And then for the teacher who is listening to this conversation and is like, oh boy, there's a lot to consider. Maybe you know the science of reading is the way to go, but you're feeling lost or uncertain on where to turn to. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I think it's just good to find someone that you feel that you can trust to put your questions by, right? So like for me, it was Dr. Stephanie Stoller, and I still reach out to her sometimes like in her Reading Science Academy to help me look at a study and say, is this really what they say they're saying? And that's exactly why I'm getting my PhD so that I can do that for people because I want to be able to look at it, read those numbers and say, yeah, this is what they say, this is what they don't say, because people can put whatever they want in the conclusions discussion section of a study, right? And they do. So we have to be wise consumers, but I don't expect a teacher to have time to do that or the energy. I mean, teaching is a noble job and I loved it when I did it, but it was exhausting. And I don't expect teachers to come home and want to pour through research. I think they should have somebody that will do that for them. Or if they don't know the answer, to send them to somebody. So sometimes I'll have people email me something and I'll say, I really don't know, but I had this person on my podcast and they were really receptive. I think you could email them and ask. And then the other thing would be listening to episodes with researchers who embrace the nuance and don't try to overplay their hand. So people, just off the top of my head, when I was thinking about this in advance, some people that I think are really good at that would be Dr. Shane Piesta. When talking about the alphabet, like she's very, very honest about what we know, what we don't know, what we have suggestions for, like Dr. Sean Datchik of Iowa State University, I think, also very good about that. And then Dr. Amy Element on comprehension. She's actually my advisor. And she's really like, she'll be honest, like, well, we have research about this or we don't. Dr. Steve Graham, really good about that as well. So look for those people who will tell you, yeah, we have research on this or we don't, or research is leaning in this direction, but we're really not sure, and embrace that. It's a little uncomfortable at first because you really want people to give you you really want them to tell you, we know for sure. We know for sure this works or doesn't. And that's just not really how research works most of the time.
Yeah. And listen to Anna's podcast because as you can see from our conversation today, you have a really nice insight on how to tackle a lot of these conversations, even if it's not what people necessarily want to hear in the moment. But I think that's what makes us all smarter and better educators, is to know that there is nuance to a lot of the noise. And that's why I appreciate you. So I'm so thankful for this conversation. I am going to just relish listening back and editing through. And I'm grateful for your time. I'm grateful for your dedication to the field and now even furthering in your academic journey for your PhD. And I'm excited to see what's down the road for you as well. So thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you, Michelle. And same to you. It's been fun to see you grow and expand your reach. And I'm sure you agree with me that having a podcast is like one of the best,
Oh my gosh.
most exciting things, to just email an expert and say, will you sit down and talk with me for an hour? And they'll say yes. And you get to pick their brain about these. It's amazing that we get to do that. So it's
I
a
love
huge
it.
blessing.
Yeah, it is a blessing. And I always say it's my favorite parts about my day is planning and preparing and editing this podcast, but also the research that goes into even wanting to chat with a
Yes.
researcher,
Yes.
like prep time beforehand. I feel like I've learned so much on this journey, and I'm grateful to delineate some of that information to listeners. And I know the same goes for your wonderful podcast. I'm a weekly regular listener.
Oh, thank you.
And also share some of your offerings. Your book is amazing.
Thank you. So yeah, listeners, if they want to check out my book, Reach All Readers, I wrote that. It was published in 2024. Now I'm losing, time goes by so fast, but I think it was 2024. Actually, we have about maybe 20 professors using it as a textbook for pre-service teachers. So it's written to be very understandable, but also very practical. And it's not super long and it's very affordable. Amazon keeps making it very, very affordable. So it's a good introduction to science of reading, but also like a succinct guide is what I wanted it to be. And also because I had a word limit. So I think you can check that out. I also have my podcast, Reach All Readers, and my membership, Reach All Readers Plus, is the place where we share printable resources that are aligned with the science of reading for K to third grade, and then also a lot of professional development in there. We've just started having guest speakers. In fact, this has not happened as of this recording, but Michelle and Sarah Paul are going to be coming on to talk about morphology, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
And so not only do they get to listen to member meetings where I talk about things in depth, they'll also get to get access to our library of professional development. And then, like I said, our printable library is growing and growing. We have several thousand resources that are organized by type and by topic. So a huge library of decodable passages, partner plays, complex texts, phonics materials, just loads. So they're certainly welcome to check that out. And they can do any of that by visiting my website, reachallreaders.com, or I'm always open to answering emails. It's Anna@reachallreaders.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. Every time I see some of your resources, I'm like, oh my gosh, Anna has a beautiful empire of wealth of goodies.
Well, thank you. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks again. Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully. Do you ever catch yourself saying, English is just crazy? Maybe your students come across a tricky word and you tell them, you just have to memorize that one, or this is the part you have to know by heart. But deep down, you know it's still confusing. Here's the truth. English isn't random. It's a wonderfully complex system, and once you understand how that system works, through sound, structure, and meaning, everything changes. That's what Sarah, Paul, and I teach inside Mastering Morphology. This isn't another curriculum. It's deep teacher knowledge inside a practical, comprehensive course that finally shows you how words really work. No more exceptions, no more gimmicks or patching holes with memorization or phonics alone. It's time to go beyond sound it out and give your students the framework they need to truly understand words. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start teaching with confidence, join us inside Mastering Morphology. Enrollment is open now, so we invite you to click the link in the show notes to get started.